see that there's a notification and on their LinkedIn. And yeah. So, and we're live. So, welcome back to anyone that's been kind of following this series of Preparing the Unprepared. I'm aiming basically to connect with a bunch of different thought leaders in the space to ideally help people make smarter career and hiring decisions. To do that, I've basically kind of picked a bunch of different topics alongside these thought leaders, and we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into each specific area. And today we're going to be actually talking about toxicity in the hiring process, because I think when toxicity is rife, it really does affect every single member of staff. And needless to say, I don't think anyone really enjoys working in a negative environment. So to do that, I've actually brought a friend of mine, Vin Vashishta, who's a chief data scientist at Data by VSquared. Vin is another person that I've been following for some time. He's got over 90,000 followers or something crazy like that. He's got a degree in physics, an MBA, and has actually been listed as one of the top voices on LinkedIn in 2019. So welcome to the show, Vin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And thanks for hosting this topic. A lot of people won't touch this, so it's important. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think, we're both people who can kind of speak our mind and touch on things that people, like you said, are a little bit afraid to approach. So, if we can cover some of those things here, hopefully it will help people make better decisions moving forward. So, look, why not let's dive in straight away. So there's a bunch of different topics within this subject that we're going to cover around kind of what makes the hiring process toxic, how does that reflect on your business, how to spot toxicity in a data science team specifically, because Vin's got some experience in doing that. And then we're going to hopefully come up with some ideas around behavioral practices that create better functioning processes and increase your hiring success. So whilst we're doing that, you're welcome to send us any questions and we'll kind of answer them as we go. So fire away, Vin. What in your opinion makes a hiring process toxic?
Well, the first thing that companies kind of realize when they're dealing with a hiring process and starting to look at it from a research perspective and a scientific perspective, which is something I've spent about 5 years really looking at, what is the best way to hire? And it rarely has anything to do with degree. It rarely has anything to do with years of experience. Those are sort of the areas that your requirements get funneled into, and they don't relate to employee outcomes. They don't end up having a whole lot of impact. But those are two areas where you start to see toxicity reach into the hiring process, because it sort of starts to push away candidates. So instead of hiring being an inclusive process where you want as many candidates as possible and you want different backgrounds, you begin to funnel people through those two requirements. And then everything from there is sort of skewed. And so companies like Google and Facebook and a lot of these companies that are starting to look at more advanced hiring practices have moved away from the degree requirement. The federal government in the United States has also moved away recently from the degree requirement. And so we're starting to see an understanding of just the basics of where toxicity starts. And that's the foundation, is really creating a process that's excluding versus including. And anytime you see that as a criteria of hiring, where you're trying to weed out as many candidates as possible rather than trying to bring in as many candidates as possible, that's the seed which starts your toxicity in the hiring process. Mm-hmm. And from there, it just gets worse, because you've set the example for the interviewers, many of whom, especially data scientists and machine learning engineers and researchers, they're not experts in hiring. And a lot of HR teams, as much as they try, as many hours of training as they can put into this, it's hard to get a team even that's science-driven, that's research-driven, to start researching hiring and what questions to ask and how to create a rigorous process. And so again, now you have another layer of toxicity added on. You have a group that's trying to exclude candidates, trying to eliminate the weakest candidates. And then you have a group who doesn't really have a large awareness of what a well I guess, well-researched, well-created, well-structured hiring process is. And it begins, like I said, it layers on top of each other. Now you're hiring people who are similar to the people that are already in place, because those are the ones who are most comfortable. You start looking at hiring decisions in the morning versus hiring decisions in the afternoon. People in the afternoon are decision fatigued, especially if you're in data science or machine learning. You've made hundreds of very complex decisions by the time you get to lunch. And now, again, you've had a level of fatigue in the process, and you are less likely to make a creative and innovative choice and more likely to go with the safe choice, which is don't hire this person.
I'd never thought about that.
Honestly, and that's the research side of this. If you haven't walked through decision science, if you haven't walked through the psychology and the economic, the game theory behind hiring, if you haven't walked through a lot of that research, all of these things are novel, but they're not new. They've been out there for some of them 20 years.
It makes me wonder whether, as a recruiter, I should be really encouraging people to book interviews in the morning. Yes. Seriously. Yeah, I'd not thought about that.
Monday, really first thing in the morning. Yeah, Monday, first thing in the morning, or Tuesday, first thing in the morning. Tuesday is actually better, because Monday is one of those days that people dread. They get in on Monday and there's usually a pile of work. And so it's a good day because they're fresh, but it's a bad day because they're distracted. They're worried about what comes after the interview, not talking to the candidate.
Mm-hmm. And to touch on something else you said there as well, and it's a common theme that I've seen, businesses tend to look for reasons to almost have an interviewee fail, as opposed to trying to find reasons why they could be successful in the role. And do you think that just comes down to the fact that realistically data scientists aren't trained in handling interview processes or interviews themselves?
We're used to trying to find the best, not by including as many people as possible, because that's a high level of effort, but excluding as many people as possible, and then assuming that by excluding everyone who, based on a resume or based on a phone call, didn't do very well, didn't resonate, didn't click. Now we're excluding as many people as possible. And we associate that with a better process. But in many cases, a more time-consuming and a more exhaustive search results in a better candidate. And so if hiring isn't given time, if it's not on the schedule, then you want to put as little time as possible into it. If time is really set aside on everyone's schedule on a monthly basis, you have this many hours for interviewing, for networking, for going to events, for really talking to talent and being an active participant in outreach. If you put that on the calendar, you'll find a lot of data scientists enjoy that. A lot of machine learning scientists enjoy that, because it's outreach, it's talking at conferences, it's interacting with people online, it's doing things like this. So you end up having a more engaged individual in the process, and that results in a more exhaustive search. And toxicity really starts in a team when we are trying to exclude as many people as possible and spend as little time as possible developing people. And this is sort of beyond just hiring, but also developing, creating a farm club of talent. Not only going outside of the organization or outside of the company, but going outside of the organization, talking to analysts, software developers, sometimes product managers, sometimes people that are not technical, and talking to them and saying, we want you in the team. And that attitude shift is a whole piece of removing toxicity. When you become inclusive externally, when you become inclusive, and that's not just a diversity, that's just across the board. If you include people and say, from the perspective of, we want you to join the team, we want to get you ready to join the team at any point, you create a pipeline of talent.
Yeah. There's a common theme in all of the podcasts that I've hosted, and communication seems to be one of those challenges that we all face. It's just surprising to me how people don't talk more cross-functionally across a business. And I'm interested to know, because I know that you've cleaned up quite a few data science teams. What has been the obvious the obvious challenges that teams are facing that businesses could right now start thinking about to improve their hiring process?
Get away from all of these massive requirements. Get away from the ridiculous, job descriptions and job requirements documents. Get away from them. Okay. Look at industry leaders and try to reduce your requirements down to maybe 6 lines, and make the majority of your job description reasons why someone would want to work there. Reasons why, again, inclusive. We want you, not, there's 1,000 yous, there's only one of us. It's a completely different paradigm when you say, I want you to work for us. I want you to work with us. And I want to create a team that people want to work with, that people look up to, that people look at the leadership of and say, I would follow that person. I want to create a team where someone comes in, sits down for an interview, and immediately feels like this is a competent team. There are processes in place as a company to make me successful because all of these other people are successful. And again, this concept of bringing as many people in as humanly possible. Mm-hmm. You begin to see a completely different culture emerge. And you start to weed out the people who are, I don't know what to call them. Bad actors is the wrong word, but you know where I'm going. Sort of the toxicity sinks. Yep. They begin to leave because it's a culture that doesn't support gatekeeping. It's a culture that does not support this elitism and superiority complexes. Fiefdoms go away, silence go away. You have the collaboration in place and require communication with external teams. And you'll see toxic people just kind of weed themselves out because it's not a culture they fit in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of ownership on the hiring managers themselves to really drive this from the ground up. And I guess LinkedIn is a great platform to do that. There's other social media points that you can use. But having had experience as a recruiter for over 10 years now, all of the best teams that I've hired into have a very active hiring manager. Mm-hmm. And I mean that literally from the start of the process. Maybe the hiring manager is the CEO of the business, but making the process personable, and businesses who really don't take the hiring process seriously and don't think about how that reflects on them as a team or as a culture, as a business, I think are really going to struggle to grow.
Yes.
Or at least they might grow and then just get stuck.
Well, growth can be sort of a perception rather than a reality. Adding more data scientists is not growth. Mm-hmm. Looking at putting stuff in production and just shoving product out the door, that's not growth. You're looking for ROI, you're looking for monetization, you're looking at building a path to production, and you're looking at creating an entire corporate culture that supports the machine learning team. And again, this is inclusive. You begin to reach out to teams that are more diverse, and you stop having this excuse of you're not technical enough. And this is sort of one of those phrases where you hear it a lot, and what they really mean is something a whole lot worse. Mm-hmm. You'll hear people say, well, she isn't, technical enough. We can't bring her in. And what they're really saying is the she part, or he isn't technical enough. And what they're really saying is something different. And you hear these sort of, euphemisms that sound, oh yeah, okay, she's not technical enough, or they're not technical enough. We can't talk to that group because they're not technical enough. And what they really mean is something else. And so every time I hear the word not technical enough, I think to myself, okay, so you don't know how to communicate. Is that what you're telling me? You don't know how to educate. Is that what you're really telling me? And you start hearing people back off pretty quick of, well, they're not technical enough, because all of a sudden you can use that old line. Well, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, do you really understand it?
True. But if someone said that to me now, I would probably just accept that. And that's the trouble, right?
They're not it sounds good.
Okay, I'll go and find someone else. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Damn, you're going to catch me now going to all my clients. Well, no, what do you actually mean?
Yes. And there's all of these little, like I said, there's all of these little catchphrases. And when you really think about them, when you really talk them through the reasoning process, when you question, okay, well, what would technical enough be? What would I need in order for a person to be technical enough? Do you have a training program in place that could make someone who's missing a couple of capabilities a good fit for your team. Because if you don't have that, wouldn't that be easier? Isn't that cheaper than hiring in some cases? Wouldn't internal training and development be a little cheaper? So maybe you want to start talking to people who aren't technical enough. And that changes the thought process.
Yeah, I agree. Empowering those people as well. You typically would end up in a much more successful long-term hire because they feel good that you feel good and trusted them that they could be technical enough.
And then you're bringing somebody else into their role. And you've created this pipeline. You don't stop hiring external talent. So you bring in new faces and fresh ideas, but you bring them in at different points in their career. And sometimes bringing in someone who's younger is not a bad thing. And then developing them over the course of their career, you start seeing longevity in companies. You start seeing people who don't spend a year or 2 years and then job hop because they can get a promotion someplace else and they can get more money someplace else. Now they have a career path. They have incentive to stay 5 years, incentive to stay longer in some cases, which is unheard of in tech.
Yeah. Everyone's, at least my impression, a lot of businesses are so short-sighted in that investment. They're like, okay, well, we're not going to make money immediately. But actually, the bigger picture is if you invest in someone, they stay longer. And think about that message that's going back to the market. When all of their friends from college or university are saying, well, what's going on down there? And they're telling them about all of this investment. They're focused on your career. You've learned all these new things. People are going to want to come and work for that business. So then all of a sudden you have a pipeline of people that are just coming to you.
Yep.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And so
seeing 10-year anniversaries on LinkedIn, seeing 5-year anniversary at, 10-year anniversary at, seeing those social media posts where, I'm celebrating my 7th year with, and that's a big statement.
Mm-hmm. We just don't see it often anymore.
Nope.
It's just not a thing. But it could be. And I think businesses would really benefit from keeping that long term in mind. So I guess it's twofold really. Toxicity can be identified by the business, but also by the person who's applying for a role. So have you got any advice for someone who is looking for a new position, whether they're active on the market or not so active? What could they be looking out for in an interview process that might show signs of toxicity in a workplace?
I would say do your homework before the interview. Don't just walk into interviews. I know it's tempting, especially if you're at the beginning of your career. It's hard to say no in a lot of cases to an interview. To say, I looked at your team and it's kind of questionable. So in some cases, you're going into interviews a little bit more, lax with the standards. But if you sit down in a room and you don't feel comfortable immediately, something's wrong. The people interviewing you should want you to be comfortable. They should want you to bring the best you to the process. And so if you sit down and immediately, you're seeing people sit as far away from you as possible, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. If you see postures, arms folded, turned away from you, there's phones, they're distracted, they've already made a decision. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of see almost immediately with just demeanor. There are people that walk into an interview and they've already decided they don't want to hire you. They've looked at your resume, they found something they don't like, and you're being interviewed, but there's no actual decision being made. That's a big red flag. It's sort of the attitude that people come into the interview with. During the phone screen, ask some questions back. And if you get hostile answers about why you should join the team, bad sign. If people are running you over or not giving you time at the very end, if they just go, thanks, we're running over, bye. If they're not willing to put another 10 minutes or 5 minutes into the interview, how bad do they really want to fill this job?
That's the thing. Yeah. This is as much of an assessment of you as it is you of them as well. So if they're not giving you that opportunity to learn about the business, then is it really somewhere you want to work? One thing that I've always seen in recruitment as well, which in the start of my career was awesome, when a process moved really fast, someone took a job really quickly and they were working in a new business within 3 weeks. And I was like, oh God, from a monetary perspective, I was like, wow, we're going to get paid so fast for that. Mm-hmm. But then that person leaves in 6 months or a year. So fast processes aren't always good processes either. Like, it takes time especially in the data science world, to analyze you as an individual and them as a business. And I think you should, that's my piece of advice. If a process is moving too fast, ask why. And also if it's moving too slow, you should also be concerned, is that a reflection of the speed that the decisions are going to be made in a company?
And I encourage recruiters and hiring managers, call the candidate the next day. Make 5 or 10 minutes in your schedule the next day and just call them. Because in a lot of cases, a candidate who may not have interviewed well actually wants to come back to you and re-answer some questions. They want the opportunity to say, I was wrong here and I really wanted to, let me go over this again. Or in a lot of cases, you talk to somebody that you think was a really high quality candidate and you get them on the phone the next day and they're standoffish. They're like, well, I got another offer in the pipeline. They don't say it, but you can tell they're not interested in talking to you the next day. And a lot of that follow-up, saying, hey, at the end of the interview, hey, can I call you tomorrow for 10 minutes? What's a good time?
Yeah.
I just want to follow back up with you and let you know, initial thoughts. Obviously, I can't give you any commitment, but I want to at least be able to say, I think it was a good interview, or, I don't think it really went as well as it could have. Talk to the team. And there may be some areas where we could have improved. We want to look at other candidates, and if possible, we may bring you back. But just that level of authenticity and follow-up, you care. 10 minutes the next day. Seriously, if you can't give somebody 10 minutes the next day, why'd you interview?
Yeah, I agree. The amount of times that I've seen people I spoke about this in a feedback podcast I did last week, but they get through a process 4 or 5 stages and then ghosted. Nothingness.
Why? A person's put in 4, sometimes more, sometimes 8 hours, 16 hours.
Take home challenge.
Yeah. And you're not going to give them 10 minutes?
Yeah, exactly. And here's the thing, right? I've seen that happen with people that they've said they're not quite technical enough, right? And actually, genuinely, I didn't understand that, because I'm almost certain this person or this individual had 8 or 9 years of NLP experience. They're like, it just doesn't quite have the NLP experience we need. But I'm like, what if that person really wanted to work for you? He then went away for a year, worked on his NLP, and came back to you. If you gave him a bad experience or her a bad experience, they're not gonna come and work for you again.
Yeah, exactly.
But people think so short term in hiring, and it's such a long term process.
The concept of employee lifetime value, it's a calculation that's in its infancy. It's really just spreadsheets, and there's no formalized process, but it's really a decision support algorithm that can help a business understand employee lifetime value and create organizational and employee evaluations where you can look at a person and say, if we gave them about a year's worth of training, they would be an entry-level data scientist. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, you look at that person and they go from maybe a role that's about to be downsized over the next year to someone who'll be in the pipeline for a very valuable role. And you're going to get them at a discount because this is their first promotion. They want a chance to prove themselves over that first year. You've put the money into training them. They understand the company and the culture. They already fit. You figure out all these factors. If you can bring these features into a model and begin to evaluate individuals and say that they have an arc, there is an employee lifetime value to this person. All of a sudden, training gets cheap. All of a sudden, development gets really cheap.
True.
Retention is, almost a meaningless amount of money when you compare how much they're going to return to the organization. What does it cost to do a 3-month hiring process and have to send out to, have to work with a dozen or more external recruiters? How expensive is that? And a year's worth of training is $25,000. All of a sudden, that's really cheap.
That's probably less than the fee that I charge sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. And how much are you losing with that empty chair?
Mm-hmm. If only it were that simple to just communicate, and if I could just shake some people that I work with sometimes and be like, look, let's just get this guy in. You like them? They've got 99% of the skills. Like, why are you failing them for that 1%? Like 3 months invested. They're now an employee that feels empowered. They're excited about working for you, and now you've got a positive influence in the team as well. That person's going to come in.
Yeah, you find out that toxicity goes away when you start saying, we could get this person there. This person may not be perfect today, but in the amount of time it would take me to hire someone else, I can have this person trained and up to speed. So why am I saying no when I could just be saying yes and bringing them on board? And why don't I have the training capabilities to handle this? Wait, why am I unable to upskill people? Don't I have to continuously learn myself? So how does the organization not have the ability to do this? And that's a serious question when it comes to inclusion. Why isn't the organization trying to improve its employees?
Good point.
And there again is toxicity. And it comes from the top. If there is no desire to improve the organization except through cuts, downsizing, and trying to bring in external people instead of improving who's there, that's a toxic culture. And people don't think of toxicity with these small signs. People think of toxicity as, well, that person right there said something offensive, and that's terrible, and that person needs to be removed from the culture. But you also need to remove these people before they say something offensive. You also need to remove these people before they do something or have one of those events that you suddenly have to be concerned about. So it's more than just focusing on the individual actors. It's about including as many people into the team as possible and letting those who don't have the same values begin to sort of fall outside of the process. But in some cases, they decide, this is better. I'm going to get something out of this too.
Yeah.
And that's also a process of removing toxicity, is giving people who may have a different attitude but are adaptive thinkers, who have a growth mindset, who can realize that benign behaviors like they're not technical enough are signs of something deeper. And they can start with themselves. They can sort of have that conversation with themselves.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's a certain area of responsibility. If the business is asking why we're not getting good people, are they auditing the process? Are they trying to figure out where the gaps are? There should be a level of ownership from the business saying, okay, we need to work on this. We need to improve our process, as well as having that mindset, as you mentioned. Now, we did have a question come in. I think it was asked about 10 minutes ago, so I'm not entirely sure how well it aligns, but I'm not sure who this is, but thanks for the question. It says, how do you push back on a group think? So I guess a group interview in a hiring process.
If you're a candidate, or let me answer this from two different perspectives.
Yeah.
If you're a candidate and you start getting groupthink, start asking questions.
Yeah.
The path to revelation, I love Socrates. I love going back to some of the really old philosophers, because what was true then about human nature is true now, and what was true about teaching then is true now. And that is, you reveal things through questions. You cannot talk someone into changing their mind.
No.
And if you look at decision science, it's
here.
environmental, and it is very much a process of being stuck in a single rut. Adaptive thinkers, if you spend enough time asking them questions, begin to think differently. And so if you're a candidate encountering groupthink, in an interview, ask some questions. And in a lot of cases, you'll find people receptive to your line of thinking, especially about technical questions, because what a lot of people don't understand, who have even sometimes 5 or 6 years of experience, there are multiple ways to answer technical questions. There's no one right answer. If there is, you're not asking a very good question. If you are in a team with groupthink, now it's time to ask questions regularly and to push back. Be a contrarian. And I've done this in groups where I'll say, no, let's think about this differently. And I walk them through questioning to get to a different place. But I have a unique sort of position where I can, with some authority, push back on some very smart people. And I don't mind when PhDs call me an idiot, because that had happened a lot. And I don't mind. I guess I have that level of confidence that I can push back and say, well, okay, I'm an idiot. Now explain this to me like I'm 5, because you're going to treat me that way. So why don't you just treat me like a child? Go ahead. I'm good with that. Educate me. Pretend I'm an idiot. And a lot of times in that discussion, you can, if you have the level of confidence to take a little condescension and sometimes some open hostility, you can change minds.
Yeah. I would love to be a fly on the wall in that situation.
It can get hostile, but
yeah,
really keeping objective, understanding that the other person is coming from a background sometimes of insecurity, or other times of being overly praised, overly encouraged, overly sort of indulged, and beginning the process, which is a slow one, of convincing them to have a growth mindset, to start thinking about themselves as a continuing work in progress, because most people don't have a problem with that. Yes, you can get people to say there's always more to learn, and that leads you towards a growth mindset.
Yeah, I agree. So to kind of somewhat wrap this up, I'm keen, Vin, to get some tips or some ideas or best practices to help people make decisions around behaviors to improve like the actual process itself. What kind of tips could you give people that are listening right now?
I really want to say, from a hiring perspective, this concept of internal farm clubs, internal promotions, internal development, creating a pipeline of talent towards fields like data science, machine learning, information security, some of the more research focused, your product management roles, your senior leadership, technical leadership, not just technical skills leadership, but leading technical teams. Develop people in that direction, and develop people with a growth mindset and adaptive thinking into that direction. Begin to get the organization used to looking at the cost of someone leaving in terms of knowledge. What are we losing if this person leaves? Also begin to look honestly at what your organizations look like. If you sit down in an organization and everyone has the same background, there's a problem with the hiring process. That's an immediate red flag. There should be a diversity of backgrounds. You should see a diversity of degrees, colleges, levels of experience, backgrounds. Where did they come into the field from? Where did they come into InfoSec from? Where did they come into machine learning from? Do you have a lot of people from a software development technical background? And do you also have people who are very research focused, who are looking at this from a deep understanding of the concepts and theory behind what's going on? Are they working well together? Yeah. Is there a level of teaching back and forth between the team and external organizations? And when you don't see any of those, bringing people in who have that experience, who have come from cultures that you would like yours to look like, those are important tips almost immediately that a company can implement that will lead to a better team and a better environment. You can't hire your way into diversity, but you can encourage it. And you can begin to get people to think differently, and creating an open process, an inclusive process that wants people versus an exclusive process that wants one person. Mm-hmm. Those are huge. And I mean, those are just high points. I'm sure you could go into, I mean, what are your tips from the other side of the world? What do you think?
So I think first and foremost, the challenge I have generally is, I'm going to keep coming back to, is communication. Sometimes it's very difficult for recruiters to really influence a process because there's such a negative connotation around why we're here. Now, if you find a good recruiter, just like, do your research, find the right person, make sure they're a specialist in the industry, make sure they know enough about the process, they can really make a positive impact. And again, they're a reflection of your business as well. So if you find a toxic recruiter, the chances are you're not going to find the right people for your team either. So I think my advice to businesses would be really do your research when trying to find an external partner, at least from my perspective. Really identify whether they can bring value to the process. And then if someone's been doing this for a while, listen to them. They've seen and had way more experience than you have in a multitude of different industries. I've worked with startups through to multinational organizations, and I don't think I've ever seen one process the same. But I can tell you that the successful ones do have some consistencies. And that is having the hiring manager very involved in the process, the people who are actually making the decisions, those people really understand why they're looking to hire these individuals or to grow this team. I had a conversation yesterday actually with a really interesting stealth business who's told me they're looking for 15 people before 2021. And I'm like, okay, well, why? Because it's all well and good trying to hire 15 people, but you need to have a really good understanding as to why you need those people, how you're going to bring those people in, keep them engaged. Are you going to be able to continuously develop those people to keep them engaged? So I think just working with a recruiter who has experience will make a big impact to your process anyway. And at the end of the day, like, we're not here to make it difficult. We want the process to be smoother. We want you to be successful. And trust me, we want you to keep hiring, because the more you hire, the more we get paid. Like, that's a good thing. So if you do find an external partner that's not asking these kind of questions, who's not focused on the process and just focused on finding you someone to fill the gap, then I don't think you're going to see much success. That would be my advice from an external recruitment partnership perspective. But just communicate.
I think you've nailed a lot of really good points and said them with a different perspective that's important to bring to the conversation. Yes, everybody has to be engaged, internal and external. Everybody has to be interested in making things better.
Yeah. And I guess the one thing that I always find very difficult, and look, sometimes process is process, but they can always be improved. When we're working with a business, our mission isn't to come in and infiltrate and take all of your good people. We've signed a contract. We're a partner. It's not good business for me to come in and take everyone from your team. So don't be afraid to introduce me to people in the team. It's important that I understand the culture. It's important that I know who's in the team. It's important how I understand that they move together, they communicate. A lot of the time we're just like, no, you can only ever speak to HR recruitment. And look, if that's how you want to do it, that's fine. But I've always seen the most success in growth when I'm able to talk to the team, get to know them, see it from the inside out, and the internal business wants to actually tell me what they're doing and get me heavily involved and see me as a reflection of their company. So yeah, just tell us more, give us more access, and you'll see better results. My one piece of advice also or several pieces of advice would be don't bring in 5 recruitment companies to try and fill one role, because that creates toxicity amongst us recruiters, because then it becomes about speed and not quality. It's who can make the introduction as fast as possible.
And on my side, I get this all the time. I'll get 5 different emails for the same position.
Yeah.
Really?
Yep. We've had that. We've had candidates at the final stage of the process who are still being approached by other agencies. And it's just like that person at that 5th stage might then look at the business and, although it was all going so well, they sound desperate. So there's a lot to think about. And yes, it starts internally within the business, but you do also need to think externally in terms of how you're being perceived, whether that be through an agent, whether that be through you running your own processes. There's a lot that needs to be done to improve a hiring process, but it doesn't take a lot of effort.
No, it really doesn't, but it takes awareness and it takes need. There has to be a justification within the business, and you have to have C-suite on board to say, if we hire better, and put it in terms of ROI, put it in terms of, again, this whole process of an employee lifetime value. You now put a number on it. If this person stays in their current role, they have a very, very low employee lifetime value, because this role is one of those that's going to be automated. This role is one of those that we are moving away from a business model perspective or from a revenue perspective. However, they could move into this other role. And if they decide to start training for that role, all of a sudden their ELV goes up a lot. And when you do a comparison between external hiring versus training or layoffs, which right now a lot of companies are laying off really good people with institutional knowledge, and they're losing a lot more than just a person who's maybe in a role that wasn't so great for them. You're losing a lot of money because you're hiring for other stuff, especially in technology. You may be laying off on one side of the house, but you're always hiring on another side.
Absolutely.
It's cheaper. Why not prepare your workforce for this? Why not tell your workforce in advance if they're in a role, which is the target of downsizing? Be honest.
Do you think that's your MBA training kicking in there, though? Because I think how do you communicate with executives? Like, a very obvious place to start is, this is how much money you're making and this is how much money you're losing.
No, my MBA was really economics focused. So,
okay. There we go.
Yeah, that's MBA, but when I play up the MBA when I do the strategy side, but really it's an econ focus and it's more game theory, more my field focused. But I've always had to talk to executives. I've been in companies where the only way to get anyone to do things right was to sit down with the top level. And I made some mistakes early on, which helped me understand what communicating with a strategic thinking, goal-focused, big picture. The language is different. Bringing a dashboard into one of those, you're going to get shot. It's not one of those where I can hand out a pretty picture. They've seen pretty pictures, and they'll tear it apart. They know what questions to ask, and you think you got a 20-minute presentation, you got 2 minutes, and then the questions start, because they don't want you to get into your spiel. They want you uncomfortable. They want you answering questions honestly. But it's a different process for communication. And right from the get-go, it has to be ROI. It has to be tied to one of the business goals. It has to be tied to strategy. It's best tied to their bonus if possible. Every one of the senior executives has criteria which allow them to make bonus money at the end of the year. If you can tie some of the hiring to their bonuses, all of a sudden
they're interested. Yeah.
And so it's really relating it to different organizations, because it's not just HR. It may be HR driven, but it is not about HR.
Interesting. So we've got one last question here from Abigail Shockley. I'm not sure why it's not showing the LinkedIn profile itself. I guess her question here is, maybe do we have some examples of what negative body language signs are? That's how I've interpreted that. Oh, you're doing them now. I was like, hello.
Any of those, or hold on one second.
Yeah.
Cutting you off in an answer. Any sort of adversarial posture, lack of eye contact can be completely normal. Like I have a problem with eye contact sometimes, and so it could be normal. But if a person is staring off out a window, that's bad eye contact. If a person is asking you a question and then not giving you sort of attention, that's a bad sign. It means they're going through the motions. Anything where you'll find there are two types of poses, open and closed. Open, is literally open. Your body is facing the person directly. Your attention, whether it's eye contact or just simple body pose, is focused on the person. Anytime you have someone who is staring at their colleagues more than they are at you, or distracted by a phone more than they're interested in what you're saying, anytime you see someone who is having a hard time keeping themselves from talking over you, a lot of these are posture cues. And you can find, there's a ton more. Anytime you find somebody whose body is closed or clenched, you're either looking at someone who's afraid, which is possible. Interviews can be very, very anxiety-inducing events for both sides. But consistent avoidance, not answering questions, all of these things are mental and physical postures that will tell you you're probably not dealing with an engaged audience.
Good points. And is that easier or harder to identify now in a virtual interview world?
It's really hard when you're answering a question to not only answer the question and think through your answer, but also evaluate your audience. That's hard. And so virtually, if all you see is this, I can make it look like I am talking to you while I am on my cell phone, because you can't see I'm holding it right now. You can't. Yeah. You have no idea that I'm holding my cell phone. And so it's also very difficult. I could have a second browser window open. My eyes are just off to the side a little bit. You don't know, am I looking at you on the screen, or am I coding? If you hear key types, that's another bad sign. Because I've had people code during interviews, and I'm just thinking, come on, man. What are you doing? And so, yeah, with interviews, it's on Zoom, it's really, really difficult. But people who are engaged, you can tell because they're paying attention, and you'll see a lean in every once in a while. And if their face all of a sudden gets big, and this is in-person interview too, when the direction is forward, all of a sudden, or if they kind of lean back, maybe you want to reevaluate your answer. If they went from engaged to just sort of leaning back a little bit, or if you get every once in a while, we can't control our facial expressions. And so you'll see just a little tick. And when there's small boxes on the screen, that's hard to catch those.
Yeah. Good points though. I certainly know I'm going to be looking out for these things more now.
Yeah,
in fact, I'm probably more conscious of myself doing them now that you've mentioned them as well.
And you see me, as I'm talking, I'm drinking water, and that's a fairly normal thing. It's not a distraction. So not everything else that a person does aside from interacting with you means that they're distracted. But when you start seeing people, doing this, they're holding their head up, and they're actively trying to keep themselves engaged, or you catch them, kind of looking down off to the side, looking for something else to pay attention to. Yeah, that's a bad set of cues. It means the interview is too long for the interviewers, let alone the person answering complex questions over the course of 2-3 hours.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny as well, because really, from what you're saying, interviewing is somewhat of an art, but really you don't want to have too much practice doing it, because that means you're looking for a job for a while. But in the same breath, if you do get an opportunity to talk to a business or take an interview, don't waste people's time, but also don't turn up on the opportunity to practice these skills, or maybe practice with a friend, or figure out a different way of improving your ability to stay engaged, or to really present yourself well.
Answer questions on Stack. Best way to learn how to interview. Answer questions on Stack. It really is. If you can answer somebody's question who doesn't really understand how to do what they're doing, you are learning how to interview. And you look at the feedback to your answers on places like Stack, or there's a ton of others. I'm just using Stack as an example, but you can answer questions on Kaggle. You can answer questions on a lot of different platforms, and look at the feedback, and you kind of see, okay, maybe I could have been more complete. Maybe there is a piece of the answer that I didn't include, or I got wrong.
Yep.
Or I didn't communicate well. And those are great interview preps. Also, network your way into companies. Talk to people so you understand what they might be asking you before you show up, because you can be asked anything in a data science interview. I have a fairly structured interview process where I have one question, and then I'll dive into details based on the person's experience. I want to find things they know versus things they don't know. But you'll find most interview processes are scattered. Sometimes they're on the fly. People are sometimes thinking up questions as you're sitting there. And they may have something to do with the job, they may not. You could be asked anything.
Yeah. So trying to prepare the unprepared is probably a good title for the podcast, right?
Yes, very much so.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Vin. I'm sure there's going to be some other topics in the future that we could cover, but it's been really insightful for me, and hopefully the audience feel the same. We'll follow up this particular live with some short form content where people can kind of grab some of the questions we asked and watch them quickly, and hopefully implement them into their processes. But if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out. I know that myself and Vin are both very active on social media, so don't be afraid.
And definitely, if you're out there hearing something that resonates with you, write a post about it. Don't just ask us the question. Put your perspective out there, because that's part of being inclusive in this conversation. Is we need as many voices as possible. It shouldn't just be me talking about it. It shouldn't just be people with large followings talking about it. Everyone, get into this and talk about what you've seen. Talk about what you feel like is right, is wrong. Talk about it, discuss it, share your views.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time, Vin. Look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.